The black maid pulled a child away from a cracking balcony, and the Mafia boss realized how close he was to ruin. Marissa had spent the last few years in silence. In the sprawling mansion of the Romano family, she was just another face in the crowd, a black maid who cleaned the luxurious rooms and watched over their young son, Dylan. Her life was a routine of scrubbing floors, wiping windows, and ensuring that no one noticed her. It was safer that way. She was invisible, and that was exactly how she liked it. But today was different. Today, as she walked past the wide, open balcony overlooking the gardens, she heard the unmistakable sound of a small voice calling out, followed by a thud and a sharp scream. Marissa's heart leaped into her throat. She rushed toward the sound, her footsteps quickening as she neared the balcony. The child, Dylan, was teetering dangerously on the edge, his tiny hands gripping the railing as the wood began to crack under his weight. The sky above him was clear, but the floor beneath him was anything but stable. It was breaking, and in that moment, time slowed. Marissa's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing Dylan just as the railing gave way, pulling him away from the edge and into her arms. Her body shook with the force of the moment, the fear rushing through her like a tidal wave. Dylan was safe, but she wasn't sure how long that would last. As she held him, she heard footsteps approaching. Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss himself, appeared in the doorway. His sharp eyes locked onto her, and for the briefest moment, she saw a flicker of something in his expression, something that wasn't cold, something that was human. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't have to. His eyes were fixed on her, on the way she cradled his son, on the danger they had both just escaped. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air between them. For a long second, neither moved. Marissa could feel Vincent's gaze like a physical presence. He didn't say anything at first. Then, in a voice that was quieter than she had ever heard him, he simply said, "Are you okay?" His words were a shock, a soft question that seemed out of place coming from a man who was usually so hard, so impenetrable. Marissa, still holding Dylan tightly, nodded, but her hands were trembling. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. I'm fine, sir," she whispered, unsure of what to say next. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to notice, to care. Vincent's eyes softened slightly as he watched her. There was no anger in them, no disappointment, just a quiet kind of awe that she couldn't quite understand. He looked down at Dylan, still in her arms, then back at her. "You saved him," he said simply, his voice softer than usual. And in that moment, something shifted. Marissa had always been invisible to him. She had always been just another maid, just another worker. But now, in the face of danger, she had become something else entirely, someone who had saved his son. He took a step closer, and for the first time since she had started working in his home, Marissa felt his gaze linger not with disdain, but with something different, something that almost felt like respect. Marissa's hands still trembled as she held Dylan close to her chest, her body shaking from the rush of adrenaline. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on her, but she refused to let go. The child was safe. That was all that mattered. She could feel his tiny heart beating rapidly against her own, the fear still fresh in his wide eyes. His hands were clutching her, as if he were trying to anchor himself to her safety. For a brief moment, she let herself breathe. The world around her seemed to fade as she focused on the child in her arms. But the sound of footsteps brought her back to reality. She slowly looked up, meeting Vincent's gaze. The powerful man stood in the doorway, his dark eyes fixed on her, an unreadable expression on his face. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. He took a step forward, his movements deliberate. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. The words, simple as they were, made her chest tighten. No one had ever asked her that before, not like this. She had always been the one to tend to others, to clean up the messes they left behind. She had never been the one who mattered. But now, standing there in the cold light of the hallway, Vincent's eyes were on her with a level of care she had never imagined. She nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure him or herself. Vincent didn't seem to buy it. He stepped closer, his gaze softening as he looked at her, then back at the child in her arms. Dylan had stopped crying, though his small hands were still gripping her shirt. Vincent's eyes lingered on the child for a moment before he spoke again. You saved him. His voice was thick with something. Admiration, maybe, or disbelief. Marissa felt a rush of heat spread across her face. She had never been the center of attention, never been noticed for more than her work. But now, in Vincent's gaze, she saw something that was unfamiliar: respect. It made her feel uneasy. It's my job, she said quietly, looking down at Dylan, her words escaping her before she could think them through. Vincent's eyes didn't leave her. It's more than that, he replied softly, almost to himself. The way he said it made her feel as if there was more to the moment than just what had happened. She had expected him to be angry, to reprimand her for breaking the rules, for acting without permission. Instead, there was nothing but quiet understanding. Marissa shifted her weight, uncomfortable under his gaze. He's just a child, she said, as if that could explain everything. Vincent's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might say something sharp, but instead, he just nodded. You're right. He's just a child, he said, his voice low, almost contemplative. And you? He stopped, his eyes flickering for the briefest moment. You're more than just a maid, aren't you? The question hung in the air between them, and Marissa felt a knot form in her stomach. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure how to respond. All her life, she had been defined by what she did: cleaning, serving, staying invisible. She had never been anything more than that. But the way Vincent looked at her now made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could be something else. Before she could answer, Vincent turned his attention back to Dylan. The boy had fallen silent, his small body still trembling in Marissa's arms. Vincent's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like warmth in his eyes. He'll be all right, he said, though there was an edge to his voice, a protective undertone that Marissa wasn't used to hearing from him. He was the Mafia boss, the one everyone feared, the one who made the rules. But in that moment, he was just a father. It was a strange thing to witness. The silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was more like an understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of the fragile moment they had just shared. Vincent stepped back slightly, his eyes still on Marissa. Thank you, he said, his voice quieter now. For saving him. Marissa nodded, still unsure of how to respond. Her hands were still shaking, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something she couldn't quite name. As Vincent turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the hallway, Marissa stood there for a moment, her heart still racing. The weight of what had just happened was starting to settle in. She had saved a child's life. And in doing so, she had done something that no one had ever expected her to do. She had become more than just a maid. Marissa sat in the quiet hallway, still clutching Dylan to her chest. The weight of what had just happened felt heavy, as if the entire world had shifted in that one moment. The echoes of Vincent's words, the softness in his voice, lingered in her mind. It was strange, this feeling that had settled in her chest. No one had ever treated her like this before. No one had ever seen her as more than just a maid, a shadow in the background. But Vincent had, and it was something she could hardly comprehend. She looked down at Dylan, his small hands still gripping her tightly, as if he couldn't let go. His wide eyes met hers, and she smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. It's okay, she whispered, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions she felt inside. You're safe now. She held him for a moment longer, finding comfort in the simple act of caring for him. But the silence was broken by footsteps approaching once more. She looked up to see Vincent standing at the end of the hallway, his tall figure framed by the doorway. For a moment, he said nothing, just watching her with a look that was hard to read. It wasn't the cold, distant gaze she had become accustomed to. No, this was different. This was something softer, something human. Marissa, he said finally, his voice carrying an unusual weight. She stood up, still holding Dylan close. Yes, sir. She wasn't sure what to call him anymore. The distance between them seemed to have collapsed in an instant. I need to speak with you, Vincent said, his tone steady, though there was an undercurrent of something more in his words. Come with me. She nodded silently and followed him down the hallway, her heart still racing. As they walked, the mansion felt different. It no longer seemed like a place of luxury and wealth. Instead, it felt heavy, as if it had seemed too much. Vincent led her to his office, a room she had never dared to enter before. The door closed behind them, and she felt a wave of unease wash over her. She had never been in this space before, a space that belonged to him. The man who controlled everything, the man who had always kept her at a distance. Now, he was inviting her in. Vincent gestured to a chair, and she sat, still holding Dylan on her lap. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than she was comfortable with. There was something different about him now, something raw, as if he were no longer the same man who ruled this house with an iron fist. "I'm sorry," he said, breaking the silence. "For what happened today. You didn't have to do that." Marissa felt a lump form in her throat. I couldn't let him fall," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She was unsure why she was even explaining herself. She had acted on instinct, on the overwhelming need to protect the child in her arms. Vincent nodded, his expression softening. "I know. I saw that. But you shouldn't have had to put yourself in danger. No one should ever have to do that." His words were unexpected, and for a moment, Marissa didn't know how to respond. She had always expected to be overlooked, to be treated as nothing more than a servant. But here he was, speaking to her. Like she mattered. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't sure how to handle. "I'm just a maid," she said quietly, almost to herself. Vincent's gaze darkened, and he shook his head. "No, you're not just a maid. Not anymore. You're—" He paused, as if searching for the right words. "You're someone who did something I couldn't. You saved my son's life today, Marissa. You showed me that there's more to you than I ever thought." Marissa looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the Vincent she had known, the cold, calculating man who ran this mansion. This was someone else, someone she didn't understand. And yet, she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. "I didn't do it for you," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were still shaking. "I did it for him. Dylan is just a child. He deserves to be safe." Vincent's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, he almost seemed vulnerable. "I know, and I'm grateful. More than you know." He paused again, his gaze lingering on her. "I don't know what I would have done if I had lost him." There was a silence between them, filled only by the sound of their breathing. It felt like the world had stopped moving, like they were the only two people in the room. Vincent cleared his throat, standing up and walking to the window. The view of the gardens below seemed to calm him, but Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The distance that had once existed between them was gone, and it left her feeling exposed. "You're not like the others," he said suddenly, his voice low. "You're different. And that's why I need to know what happened here today. I need to understand why you did what you did." Marissa stood up, holding Dylan in her arms. She didn't want to answer him, not because she had anything to hide, but because she didn't know what to say. How could she explain that she had acted out of sheer instinct, out of the need to protect a child who had no one else? How could she explain that, for the first time in her life, she had felt like she mattered? But Vincent was still watching her, waiting for an answer. And she knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. Vincent stood by the window, his gaze focused on the sprawling gardens below. The stillness in the room was thick, as if the weight of what had just transpired hung in the air between them. Marissa, still holding Dylan in her arms, felt an unfamiliar unease crawl up her spine. She had always kept her distance from Vincent, the powerful Mafia boss who ruled this mansion with cold indifference. But today, everything had changed. Today, she had seen a side of him she never expected. The man who had always been a figure of authority, a distant and untouchable presence, was now standing before her with something resembling vulnerability in his eyes. He turned to face her, his expression serious, but there was a softness in his gaze that she couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but carrying a weight that was rare for him. "About what happened today. About you." Marissa didn't know how to respond. She had saved Dylan, yes, but she didn't see herself as anything special. She had done what anyone in her position would have done. The instinct to protect the child had been overwhelming. But Vincent, for some reason, was looking at her as if she had done something extraordinary. "You acted without thinking," Vincent continued, his voice quieter now. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't wait for permission. You just saved him." Marissa shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone like Vincent. She had always been invisible in this house, just another maid who did her job and went unnoticed. But now, in his presence, She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. I couldn't let him fall, she said softly, looking down at Dylan, whose small hands were still clinging to her. He's just a child. He didn't deserve to be in danger. Vincent's gaze softened as he looked at Dylan, his son, now peacefully asleep in Marissa's arms. The transformation in him was subtle, but it was there. His usual cold demeanor had been replaced by something more human, more vulnerable. For the first time since she had met him, Marissa saw a man who cared, not just about his position, his power, or his empire, but about the people in his life. It was a rare sight. You're not just a maid. Marissa, Vincent said, his voice low but firm. Not anymore. She looked up at him, confusion clouding her thoughts. I don't understand, she said quietly. Vincent took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. What you did today, it changed everything. You're not invisible to me anymore. His words caught her off guard. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a servant, someone whose presence went unnoticed. But here he was, telling her that she mattered, that she had done something important, something that had made him see her in a different light. I don't want to be just a maid, Marissa said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She didn't know where the courage had come from, but in that moment, she realized she didn't want to remain in the shadows any longer. She didn't want to be invisible. Vincent's gaze softened further, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something that resembled understanding in his eyes. I know, he replied, his voice quiet but resolute. You're not just a maid, Marissa. You're someone who matters. Someone who does the right thing, even when it's hard. And that's something I respect. She didn't know how to respond. The words he had just spoken felt too big, too overwhelming. For so long, she had lived her life with the belief that she was nothing more than the work she did, that her value came from how well she served others. But now, standing in Vincent's office, with Dylan still clutched in her arms, she felt something shift within her. She felt seen, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Vincent stepped back, his eyes still on her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the weight of the conversation hung in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. I want you to stay, he said, his voice low but steady. Marissa's heart skipped a beat. Stay? She echoed, unsure if she had heard him correctly. I'm offering you more than just a job, Vincent continued. I want you to stay here, with me, with my family. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that what you did today, it's worth something. The words hung in the air between them, and Marissa felt a surge of emotions that she didn't know how to process. She had never been offered something like this before. To stay, to be part of something greater than herself. You don't have to make a decision right now, Vincent added, his voice softening. But know this, I don't see you the way I did before. You've earned my respect, Marissa. She stood there, unsure of what to say or how to feel. The future seemed uncertain, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was no longer the same. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice. Marissa sat alone in her small room, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the worn blanket that covered her bed. The evening had fallen, and the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the mansion's heating system. Dylan had long since fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny body relaxed and peaceful. The weight of the day settled heavily on her shoulders, and she found herself lost in thought. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. You're not just a maid. She had never been told anything like that before. In this house, in this world, she had always been just another invisible person, someone who could be replaced at any moment. But Vincent had made her feel like she mattered. It was a feeling she wasn't sure how to process. She had always prided herself on staying out of the spotlight, on doing her work without drawing attention to herself. But now, things were different. She had saved Vincent's son. She had done something no one expected her to do. And Vincent had noticed. The thought made her stomach flutter with uncertainty. What did this mean for her future here? What did it mean for her and Vincent? The lines between employer and employee had always been clear, but now they felt blurred. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the change that was slowly creeping into her life. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about something deeper, something she wasn't sure how to handle. The sound of the door creaking open broke her thoughts. She looked up to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they just stood there, both unsure of what to say. Marissa, Vincent said softly, stepping into the room. Can I talk to you? His voice was different from earlier, gentler, almost hesitant. She nodded, though her heart was racing. She wasn't sure what he wanted, but she knew it was important. Of course, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Vincent walked over and sat down at the small table across from her, his gaze never leaving her. He seemed deep in thought, as if he were carefully considering his next words. I've been thinking a lot about what happened today, he began, his tone measured. About what you did for Dylan. You saved him, and that means more to me than you can know. Marissa felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was strange, hearing him speak with such sincerity. She had never seen this side of him before. The powerful Mafia boss, the man who controlled everything, was now sitting in front of her, vulnerable and grateful. I didn't do it for you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I did it for him. He's just a child. He didn't deserve to be in danger. Vincent's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. I know, he said quietly. But it's more than that. You didn't hesitate. You didn't think about the consequences. You just acted. He paused, his gaze intense. That kind of courage, it's rare, and I want to make sure you know that it doesn't go unnoticed. Marissa swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. She had always done what she had to do, always acted on instinct, never thinking about what others might think. But this was different. Vincent was looking at her in a way that made her feel like she mattered, like she had done something significant. I never thought you'd see me differently, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm just a maid. That's all I am. Vincent shook his head, his expression firm. You're so much more than that, Marissa, he said, his voice steady. You've proven that today, and I want you to know that I see you as more than just an employee. The weight of his words hit her all at once, and she found herself at a loss for words. She had never been treated this way before, never been told that she was more than what she appeared to be. In this mansion, in this world, she had always been just another face, just another worker who did her job without question. But now, Vincent had changed everything. I'm not sure what to do with this, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. I've never been anything more than what I do. I've always been invisible. I don't know how to be anything else. Vincent's eyes softened, and he leaned forward, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. You don't have to figure it all out right now, he said gently. But I want you to know that you have a place here. You have a purpose beyond the work you do for me. Marissa felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. She had always been afraid of stepping outside the boundaries of her role, of daring to dream of something more. But in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to have a life beyond the confines of this mansion. Maybe she could be more than just a maid. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know what to say. Vincent stood up, his gaze never leaving hers. You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm here. And if you need anything, if you want anything, I'll make sure it happens. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. We'll figure this out together, Marissa. You're not alone in this. And with that, he left the room, closing the doors softly behind him. Marissa sat in silence for a long time, the weight of his words settling in her mind. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life of her own, one that was more than just serving others. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice. Marissa woke up early the next morning, the sunlight spilling through the curtains in soft beams. The mansion was still, as it always was at this hour, with only the sound of distant footsteps from the staff preparing for the day. She lay in bed, for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts still lingering on the conversation she had had with Vincent the night before. His words had kept her awake, turning over and over in her mind. You're not just a maid. She had always thought of herself as nothing more than that, just another face among the servants. But now, Vincent had made her question everything she had believed about herself. She wasn't sure what to do with these new feelings, this new sense of possibility. For years, she had buried herself in her work, convinced that she would always be invisible. But now, for the first time, she felt like she could be something more. What exactly that more was, she wasn't sure. But there was a stirring inside her, a feeling that something had shifted, something that could never go back to the way it was. She sat up, her feet touching the cold floor, and she looked around the small room she had called home for so long. It was nothing special, just a place to sleep, to rest, to survive. But it felt different now. She felt different. After a few moments of stillness, she stood and walked over to the window, pushing the curtains aside. The garden outside was beautiful in the early light, the flowers blooming in the crisp morning air. It was a sight she had seen countless times, but today, it felt different. The mansion, the estate, everything seemed to hold more meaning now. As she stood there, she thought about what Vincent had said. He had offered her something she never expected. A place, a purpose, more than just a job. She wasn't sure what that meant for her future, but it made her feel like she had choices. Real choices. For the first time in years, she felt as though she wasn't just a bystander in her own life. She was part of something. She could make decisions. And that terrified her. But it also excited her. With a deep breath, she turned away from the window and started getting dressed. The day ahead would be like any other, she knew. She would do her duties, serve the family, and go unnoticed like she always did. But in the back of her mind, she wondered if things would ever truly be the same. She was still just the maid, wasn't she? Still the one who cleaned the rooms, served the meals, and took care of the children. She wasn't sure if she was ready to embrace whatever new role Vincent had in mind for her. But as she moved through her morning routine, she found herself thinking about it more and more. Could she step into a new role? Could she change? She didn't know. But she was beginning to think that maybe she could. As she entered the kitchen, she saw the staff moving about, preparing breakfast. The usual bustle of the household had already begun. She nodded to a few of the other servants, offering quiet greetings, but no one paid her any more attention than usual. It was the way it always was. She was invisible, just as she had always been. But today, for some reason, it felt different. She moved through the kitchen, gathering the necessary items for breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and the sound of clinking dishes was a familiar comfort. But as she worked, her thoughts kept returning to Vincent's words. She was different now. She had to be. The morning passed in a blur of routine, with Marissa working alongside the other servants, preparing food, cleaning, and tending to the household's needs. Everything was as it always was, yet it felt somehow less suffocating. She moved through her tasks with a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. But still, she didn't know what to make of Vincent's offer. He had told her she was more than just a maid, but what did that mean? What did it mean for her place in this world? As the morning wore on, she found herself in the garden, collecting herbs for the kitchen. The air was cool, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. She paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene. It was hard to believe that, just the day before, everything had felt so different. It was as if a door had opened in her life, one that she had never thought possible. But now, she wasn't sure if she was ready to walk through it. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Vincent approaching. He was dressed as he always was, in dark, tailored clothes, his presence commanding. But today, there was something different about him. There was a softness in his eyes, a quietness in his demeanor that she hadn't noticed before. "Marissa," he said, his voice low and steady. "I wanted to check on you." She nodded, unsure of what to say. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, her voice quiet. "I'm just thinking." Vincent smiled slightly, a rare gesture. "You don't have to call me sir anymore," he said. "You're not just a servant in this house. You're more than that." Marissa looked up at him, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what to say. The words were still too big for her to comprehend. "I appreciate what you did yesterday," Vincent continued. "And I want you to know that you're not just here to work. You're part of this family now, Marissa. And I'll make sure you have the life you deserve." The weight of his words sank in, and for the first time, Marissa felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew she had a choice. A choice she had never had before. And as she stood there, looking out at the garden, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Maybe, just maybe, she could become something more. Something that wasn't just a maid. The days following Vincent's words felt like a slow awakening for Marissa. It was as if she had been living in a haze, only now seeing the world clearly for the first time. The mansion felt different beneath her feet, less like a place where she simply worked and more like a space where she was beginning to belong. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. She had never been one to seek attention or recognition, but now, every step she took seemed filled with possibilities she had never imagined. Vincent's offer lingered in her mind constantly. He had told her she was part of the family now, that she wasn't just a maid anymore. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent so many years defined by what she did for others, by the tasks she performed, that she didn't know who she was outside of that role. And yet, something inside her began to shift. She started to notice the small changes. How she held her head a little higher when she walked through the halls, how her shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of invisibility. She noticed how Vincent's presence no longer intimidated her the way it used to. Instead, when he was near, she felt an odd sense of comfort, a quiet understanding between them that neither of them had spoken about. One evening, as she was finishing up her duties in the kitchen, she heard Vincent's voice calling her name. "Marissa," he said, his tone gentle but firm. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, his eyes watching her with that same intensity she had seen before, but there was something else there now, something warmer. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't sure why, but she had a feeling this conversation would change everything. Vincent led her to the study, a room she had always avoided. It was where he spent most of his time when he wasn't overseeing the household. The walls were lined with books, the furniture polished to perfection, and the air was heavy with the scent of leather and wood. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her hands clasped in her lap. The silence stretched between them for a moment, before Vincent spoke again. "I've been thinking about you a lot, Marissa," he said quietly. She met his gaze, unsure of what to say. "I know you've been here for a while now, and I know how you've always kept to yourself," he continued, his voice steady but softer than usual. "But things are changing. Things are changing for you." Her pulse quickened at his words, and she tried to swallow the lump that had formed in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've noticed the way you've been changing, the way you've been holding yourself differently. You're not the same person you were when you first came here," he said, his eyes locked on hers. Marissa's mind raced, and she struggled to find her voice. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change, someone who could become more than she was. But now, hearing Vincent say it out loud, it made her feel like maybe there was more to her than just the life she had lived. "I've been thinking a lot about your place here," he said, his voice softer now. "You're not just here to clean and serve. You've proven yourself in ways that go beyond that. And I want to make sure you know that. I want you to understand that you have a future here. A future where you're more than just a maid." Marissa felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was overwhelming, hearing Vincent speak like this. She had always thought of herself as invisible, someone who was only seen when needed and then quickly forgotten. But Vincent had made her feel like she mattered, like she had a future. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Vincent replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "I just want you to know that I'm offering you something. A chance to live your life on your terms. You don't have to stay in the shadows anymore. You can have a place here, one where you're respected and valued." The weight of his words pressed down on her, and for the first time, she felt a sense of hope that she had never allowed herself to feel. She had always kept her distance from her own dreams, always told herself that this was as good as it would get. But now, Vincent had offered her a chance to break free from that. "I've never thought of myself as someone who could have more," Marissa admitted, her voice small but steady. "I've always just done my job, and that was enough. But now I don't know what to think." Vincent reached across the table, placing his hand on hers. His touch was warm, steady, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Marissa," he said gently. "But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm offering you more than just a job. I'm offering you a future, a chance to be someone other than just the person who cleans up after everyone else." She looked down at their hands, her mind still reeling from the enormity of his offer. She had never imagined that she could have more than this, that she could have a life outside of serving others. But now, with Vincent's words echoing in her mind, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always dreamed of. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. "But I want to try. I want to see where this goes." Vincent smiled, his eyes filled with something that resembled hope. "That's all I ask," he said softly. We'll figure it out together. As she left the study, Marissa felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a choice. And that was enough. Marissa woke the next morning to the soft rays of sunlight creeping through the curtains. The house was quiet as it always was before the staff began their duties, but today, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. It felt as if everything around her was charged with energy, waiting for something to happen. She took a deep breath, pushing herself out of bed, the weight of the previous night still heavy on her mind. Vincent had said she was more than just a maid, that she had a future here, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had spent so many years believing that her role in life was to stay unnoticed, to keep her head down and do her job without question. But now, that world had shifted. Now, she was being given a choice. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As she prepared for the day, Marissa couldn't help but wonder how much her life was about to change. She had always told herself that being invisible was the safest way to live, that it was easier to stay in the shadows. But now, she wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. She had already begun to see herself in a different light. The woman she had always been, quiet, unnoticed, invisible, was beginning to fade away. She was becoming someone else, someone who was starting to believe in her own worth. After finishing her morning routine, Marissa walked down the hallway to the kitchen. The staff was already busy preparing breakfast, the scent of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee filling the air. She greeted a few of the other servants, offering her usual polite nods, but something felt different today. She felt seen. She wasn't sure if anyone else could feel it, but she could sense a shift in herself. She wasn't just the maid anymore. As she entered the kitchen, the head cook, Mrs. Garcia, looked up from her work. "Good morning, Marissa," she said with a smile. "How are you today?" Marissa paused for a moment, surprised by the genuine warmth in Mrs. Garcia's voice. It was rare for anyone to speak to her like this, like she mattered. "I'm doing well," Marissa replied, returning the smile. "Thank you for asking." Mrs. Garcia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, I've noticed a change in you," she said, her voice low, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "A change?" she echoed, unsure of what Mrs. Garcia meant. "Yes," Mrs. Garcia said, setting down her knife and turning toward her. "You've been walking with your head held high these past few days. You've always been quiet, but now, you seem different." Marissa felt a flush rise to her cheeks, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought about it like that, but now that Mrs. Garcia mentioned it, she realized it was true. She was different. She didn't feel as invisible anymore. It was a strange feeling, and she didn't quite know what to make of it. "Thank you," Marissa said quietly, still processing the words. I've been trying to change." Mrs. Garcia smiled kindly, her expression softening. "Well, it suits you," she said before turning back to her work. Marissa stood there for a moment, the words lingering in her mind. It felt like a small victory, something that had been a long time coming. For the first time in years, she wasn't just going through the motions of life. She was starting to believe that she could be something more. As the day wore on, Marissa found herself moving through her duties with a sense of purpose. She wasn't sure exactly what had changed, but everything felt a little more in focus. Even the interactions with the other staff members, which had once felt distant and mechanical, now felt warmer, more genuine. She was still doing the same tasks she always had, but now, it felt like she was finally taking ownership of her own life. By the time the afternoon arrived, Marissa found herself in the garden, tending to the flowers as she had so many times before. But today, the colors of the flowers seemed brighter, the air smelled fresher, and the world around her felt more alive. She wasn't sure if it was the garden itself or the change inside her, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. As she worked, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Vincent approaching. He was dressed casually today, without his usual suit, and for the first time, he looked like just a man, not the imposing Mafia boss. "Marissa," he said, his voice warm. "How are you today?" She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm good, thank you," she replied. "Just enjoying the garden." Vincent looked around, his eyes taking in the vibrant flowers and the peaceful surroundings. "It's beautiful here," he said, his gaze turning back to her. Just like you. Marissa's heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't sure what to say, so she just nodded, unsure if he was teasing or being sincere. Vincent smiled softly, his eyes locking with hers. I've been thinking about what you said the other day, he continued. About having a choice. And I want you to know that the choice is yours. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. But if you do, I want you to know that I'll make sure you have everything you need to live the life you deserve. His words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure what to say. The idea of leaving, of stepping away from the life she had known for so long, was both terrifying and liberating. But one thing was certain, Vincent had given her a choice. And that, for the first time in her life, felt like freedom. I don't know what the future holds, she said quietly, her voice steady. But I'm starting to believe that maybe I could have a future here. A real one. Vincent's smile deepened, and for a moment, he seemed genuinely pleased. I believe you can, he said. And whatever path you choose, I'll be here to support you. As he turned to leave, Marissa stood there, watching him walk away. The world seemed a little brighter, the possibilities a little more open. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to face it. And that was enough. Marissa spent the next few days in a haze, her mind swirling with thoughts of the conversation she had had with Vincent. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind at all hours. You're not just a maid anymore, he had said. For someone who had lived her entire life defined by her work, by the tasks she performed, and the expectations placed on her, it was hard to reconcile that with who she had always believed herself to be. But something inside her was shifting. She had saved Vincent's son. She had been the one to act when no one else could. That, in itself, was a turning point. It was the first time she had truly stepped outside the boundaries of her role, of what she had always thought her life would be. But now, standing in this house that had always felt like a prison, she was beginning to wonder if maybe it didn't have to be that way forever. The days passed, and the rhythm of the household continued as it always had. Marissa still performed her duties, serving meals, cleaning the rooms, tending to the needs of the family. But there was a subtle change in the way she carried herself. Her movements were more deliberate now, more confident. She held her head higher, no longer shrinking into the shadows. And though she still didn't speak much, there was a new air about her, a quiet strength that she hadn't noticed before. It didn't go unnoticed. The other staff members began to treat her differently. She was still just a maid, but now there was a kind of respect in their eyes, a recognition of something more. They no longer treated her with indifference, as they had before. They didn't speak to her like she was invisible, like she was just part of the background. For the first time in her life, she was seen. It wasn't much, but it was everything. One evening, as she was finishing up in the kitchen, Vincent came in, his usual air of authority surrounding him. But tonight, he seemed different, more relaxed, more approachable. He smiled at her as she turned to face him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel intimidated. Marissa, he said, his voice warm. Can we talk for a moment? She nodded, her heart suddenly racing in her chest. It wasn't unusual for him to ask for her help in the kitchen, but there was something in his tone that made this moment feel different. She wiped her hands on the towel, trying to steady her nerves. Of course, sir, she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. Vincent motioned for her to follow him, and they stepped outside into the garden, the cool evening air surrounding them. The mansion loomed behind them, but the quiet of the garden made it feel like they were in a world of their own. Vincent turned to her, his eyes soft, searching. I've been thinking about what we talked about the other day, he said, his tone serious. And I want to make sure you understand what I meant. Marissa nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. I understand, she said quietly. Vincent sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly as he took a step closer to her. No, I don't think you do, he said, his voice softer now. I meant what I said. You're not just a maid. You're someone I trust. You've earned my respect, and that's not something I give lightly. Marissa's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had never been told anything like that before. She had always been the one to serve, to stay in the background, and now, Vincent was telling her she was someone important. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Vincent reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. You don't have to say anything, he said. I just want you to know that you have a place here, Marissa. Not just as a maid, but as someone who is valued. You're not just here to work. You're part of this family, whether you realize it or not. Marissa's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him. She didn't know what to make of his words. Part of her wanted to believe him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was more than what she had always been. But the other part of her, the part that had been trained to stay invisible, to never ask for more, felt afraid. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said quietly, her eyes lowering to the ground. Vincent's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. You don't have to be ready right now, he said, his voice steady. But I want you to know that I'll be here. Whenever you're ready to take that step, I'll be here to support you. You don't have to do it alone. Marissa's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about her life. Her future. What if I'm not sure who I am without all of this? She asked, her voice small, uncertain. Vincent's expression softened, and he gently lifted her chin so that their eyes met. That's okay, he said quietly. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to try. And I'll be with you every step of the way. The sincerity in his eyes took her breath away. She had never felt so seen, so understood. It was both terrifying and liberating. She nodded, unable to find the right words. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always dreamed of. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't invisible. And the future, though uncertain, seemed full of possibilities she had never considered before. As they stood there in the garden, Vincent's hand still on her shoulder, Marissa knew that this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter in her life that she wasn't sure she was ready for, but one that she was willing to embrace. The weight of her past, of the years spent hiding and working in the shadows, was still there. But it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a starting point. A place where she could finally begin to define who she was, and who she could become. Marissa found herself awake long before the sun had risen the next morning, her mind buzzing with the weight of everything that had happened over the past few days. Vincent's words were still fresh in her mind. You're part of this family now. You don't have to do it alone. She wasn't sure what to make of that offer, or what it meant for her future. But one thing was clear, her life was no longer the same. The house, which had once felt like a prison, now felt more like a place where she could carve out a new life. But even as she stood there in the quiet of the morning, a part of her was still unsure. Could she really change? Could she step out of the shadows and claim the life Vincent had promised her? She had always believed that she was just a maid. Nothing more, nothing less. That was who she was, who she had always been. And yet, in the space of a few days, everything had begun to shift. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She dressed quickly and moved through the halls of the mansion, the morning stillness broken only by the soft sound of footsteps as the other servants began to start their day. She greeted a few of them with her usual quiet smile, but there was something different about the way they looked at her now. It was subtle, but she could see it. There was a new respect in their eyes. And for the first time, she felt seen. It was a feeling that both surprised and comforted her. As she entered the kitchen to begin her duties, she saw Mrs. Garcia preparing breakfast. The older woman looked up and smiled warmly at her. Good morning, Marissa, she said, her voice carrying a hint of kindness that Marissa hadn't expected. How are you today? Marissa hesitated for a moment before replying, unsure of how to express the flood of emotions she felt. I'm well, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Mrs. Garcia paused, as if considering her words carefully. I've noticed something different about you lately, she said, her voice low. You've been carrying yourself with more confidence. Marissa's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized it, but Mrs. Garcia was right. She did feel different. She felt like she was standing a little taller, walking a little prouder. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was starting to believe in herself. It's nothing, Marissa replied quickly, unsure of how to respond. Mrs. Garcia studied her for a moment before nodding knowingly. You don't have to hide it, you know, she said softly. I see it. You've earned it. Marissa looked down at her hands, unsure of how to process the words. She had spent so many years keeping herself hidden, keeping her head down. But now, for the first time, it felt like she was stepping into the light. And it was both exhilarating and frightening. The day moved on in a blur of familiar tasks, preparing meals, cleaning rooms, tending to the household's needs. But the weight of the conversation with Mrs. Garcia lingered in Marissa's mind. She found herself thinking more and more about what Vincent had said. You're part of this family now. It was a simple statement, but it carried so much weight. She had never been part of any family, not in the way Vincent meant. She had always been a servant, someone who was there only to serve, never to be seen as an equal. But now, things were different. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead her, but she knew she couldn't stay in the background forever. As she finished her work for the day, she found herself standing by the window, looking out at the garden. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the flowers and the trees. It was beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly take it in. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that for the first time in her life, she had a chance to shape it. She could feel a shift inside her, a quiet awakening to the possibility of something more. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. She didn't have to be invisible anymore. She didn't have to stay in the shadows. She could choose to step into the light. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard a knock on the door. She turned to see Vincent standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as always, but there was a softness in his eyes. "Marissa," he said, his voice low but steady. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Her heart skipped a beat as she nodded, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure what this conversation would bring, but she knew it was important. Vincent stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than usual, as if both of them were waiting for the right moment to say what needed to be said. Finally, Vincent spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about you," he said, his voice quiet. "About everything that's happened recently. About what you did for Dylan, and about what that means for you." Marissa felt her breath catch in her throat. She wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but she knew it was going to change everything. "I know I've asked a lot of you," Vincent continued, his gaze steady. "And I know this isn't easy, but I want you to know that I see you, Marissa. I see everything you've done. You're not just a maid to me anymore." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force she hadn't expected. She wasn't just a maid. Vincent had seen her as something more, something important. And for the first time, she realized that she had the power to define herself. "I don't know if I can be who you want me to be," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've never been anything more than what I am." Vincent stepped closer, his expression softening. "I'm not asking you to be anyone else," he said gently. "I'm asking you to be yourself. The person I know you can be. The person you've already started to become." Marissa felt tears sting her eyes as she looked up at him. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. Vincent had given her something she had never thought possible, a chance to be seen, a chance to be something more. And as they stood there together, Marissa realized that, for the first time in her life, she could choose her own path. And that was the greatest gift she had ever received. The days following the conversation with Vincent felt like a blur for Marissa. It wasn't that the tasks she performed in the house were any different, but the weight of her own thoughts seemed to carry her through each day. Each morning when she woke up, the sunlight filtering into her room felt more like an invitation to the future than a simple greeting from the world outside. She felt herself waking up in a way she never had before. Vincent had given her a choice, and though she still wasn't sure how to embrace it, something inside her had begun to shift. She wasn't just living day by day anymore. She was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she could carve a path that was hers alone. Every step she took felt heavier now. Heavier in the sense that she felt like she was walking toward something, but unsure exactly what that was. She was no longer the invisible maid, simply going about her work without any recognition. People were starting to notice the change in her. Even the other staff members greeted her with something more than polite nods now. There was respect in their eyes, something she had never felt before. And it wasn't just the other servants. The way the family treated her had begun to change, too. No longer did they speak to her as though she were just another piece of the background. They saw her. She wasn't invisible anymore. But the one thing that still held her back, the one thing that made her hesitate, was Vincent himself. The way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, it made her feel like she was walking on a fine line between two worlds. She didn't know if she could fully step into this new life he had offered her, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Could she really leave behind the life she had always known? Could she allow herself to be something more than the person who simply cleaned up after everyone else? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. One morning, Vincent called for her again. It wasn't uncommon, but the way he had spoken to her lately made her feel like he was waiting for something. Like he was waiting for her to make a decision. She wasn't sure if she was ready to make it, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. She had to take that first step. With a deep breath, she made her way to his study, the place where so many of the important decisions in the house took place. The door creaked open, and she found Vincent sitting behind his desk, as usual, but there was something different about the way he looked at her today. He wasn't just looking at her like she was an employee or someone who worked for him. No, today he was looking at her with something else in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. "Marissa," he said softly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar gentleness. "Come in. Please sit." She stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say, but she felt the weight of the moment hanging in the air between them. She had never felt so vulnerable in his presence, yet at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. "I've been thinking about you," Vincent said after a long pause, his voice low and steady. "About everything that's happened over the past few weeks. And I want to make sure you understand that I'm offering you something more than just a place here. I'm offering you a future." Marissa felt a chill run through her. She wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement, but she could feel it. Her heart was racing, and she found herself staring at him, waiting for him to explain what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not just here to work, Marissa," he said, his voice filled with something that resembled conviction. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger, to be more than just the maid, more than just the person who cleans the rooms and serves the food. I want you to know that you have the potential to be more than that, and I'm willing to help you get there." Marissa was silent for a long moment, her mind trying to wrap around the weight of his words. She had always believed that her role in life was to serve others, to remain in the background. But Vincent was offering her something she had never dared to dream of, a chance to step into the light, to step into a future where she had choices. Choices she never thought she would have. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly, her voice shaking with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be." Vincent's eyes softened as he stood up and walked toward her. "I don't want you to be anything you're not, Marissa," he said, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "I just want you to see what I see in you. I want you to realize that you're capable of so much more than you think. You've already shown me that. You've shown me that you're strong, you're capable, and you're not just someone who exists in the shadows. You've proven that. And now, I want you to believe it too." Marissa felt a lump form in her throat as she looked up at him. She had never imagined that someone like Vincent, someone so powerful, so commanding, could see her in this way. She had always been nothing more than the maid, but here he was, telling her that she had the potential to be something more. It was almost too much to take in. "I don't know if I can believe it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Vincent smiled gently and took a step closer, his presence calming. "You don't have to believe it all at once," he said softly. "Just take it one step at a time. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm asking you to see yourself the way I see you." Marissa's breath caught in her chest as his words sank in. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her more than just a role to fill. He was offering her a chance to define herself, to step into the person she had always been afraid to be. And she realized, in that moment, that she couldn't keep hiding. She had to take that first step, no matter how scary it was. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "But I want to try." Vincent's smile widened, and for the first time, she saw a warmth in his eyes that went beyond anything she had expected. "That's all I ask," he said. "We'll do this together. You're not alone, Marissa. Not anymore." And in that moment, Marissa knew that everything had changed. She was no longer just the maid. She was someone who had the power to choose her own future. And that was the beginning of something new. Marissa spent the following days in a kind of quiet reflection. Each moment seemed to stretch out before her, filled with possibilities she had never imagined before. As Vincent had told her, she was no longer just a maid in this house. She was something more. But what that more meant, she wasn't entirely sure. She had always been the one who did the work in silence, who kept her head down and moved through the world unnoticed. It had been safer that way, but now, she was starting to understand that maybe it didn't have to be that way anymore. The change wasn't just in the way Vincent saw her. It was in the way she saw herself. The other servants had begun to treat her differently too. There was respect in their eyes now, and that respect was something she had never known. She wasn't just the person who cleaned the floors and made the meals. She was starting to become someone who was seen for more than her labor. And that, in itself, was enough to set her heart racing with both excitement and fear. She had always lived her life with the belief that she was only as valuable as the work she did. But now, Vincent had shown her that there was more to her than that. He had given her a glimpse of something bigger. The offer to step into something beyond what she had known was both a gift and a challenge. What was she supposed to do with it? Marissa moved through her duties with a new sense of purpose, though she wasn't sure what direction her life was heading. It wasn't that she felt ungrateful for the opportunities she was being given. She simply felt unsure of how to embrace them. She was terrified that if she accepted Vincent's offer, she would lose the quiet stability she had known all her life. The life of service she had led was comfortable in its own way, even if it was lonely and often overlooked. But now, she could feel the pull of something greater, something she had always denied herself the right to dream of. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the study, she caught herself lost in thought. The book in her hands, a novel she had been reading during her rare breaks, slipped from her fingers. It landed with a soft thud on the floor, pulling her out of her thoughts. She bent down to pick it up, and as she straightened, she saw Vincent standing in the doorway. His presence filled the room, but there was something different about him today. He wasn't in his usual suit, and there was a casualness to his posture that made him seem more approachable. "Marissa," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded, her heart beating a little faster as she moved to the chair beside his desk. He stepped in and closed the door gently behind him. The familiar silence of the study enveloped them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though the room itself had become a place for real conversation. Vincent sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. He looked at her with the same intensity that had unsettled her so many times before, but today, there was something warmer in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "about being ready to step into something more." Marissa looked down at her hands, not sure how to respond. "I'm still not sure if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent's eyes softened as he leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to be ready right now, Marissa. It's okay to take your time with this. But I want you to understand something. You've already started down this path. You've already made the choice to change, even if it's just by how you're carrying yourself." Marissa looked up at him, surprised by his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice thick with uncertainty. Vincent's smile was small but genuine. "I see it, Marissa. I see the way you've changed, the way you're stepping into yourself. You're not just hiding in the shadows anymore. You're here, fully present. And I think that's something to be proud of." His words were like a balm to the uncertainty that had been swirling in her chest. It wasn't just that he saw her. It was that he was acknowledging the steps she was taking, even the small ones. It made her feel like maybe she wasn't so alone in this after all. "I don't know if I can become the person you see in me," Marissa said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've spent so long being nothing more than what I do. I don't know who I am outside of that." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady and kind. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to be anyone other than who you are right now. The person you are now is more than enough." Marissa felt something shift in her chest. It was as if the weight of her past, of her doubts, her fears, her need to remain invisible, had begun to lift. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to be perfect. She didn't have to have it all figured out. All she had to do was take the next step, no matter how small. I think I'm ready to try," she whispered, her voice steadying with each word. Vincent's smile widened, and for the first time, Marissa felt like the distance between them had disappeared. He wasn't just her employer anymore. He was someone who saw her, truly saw her, and wanted to help her find her own way. "That's all I ask," he said softly, standing up. "I'll be here, Marissa, and when you're ready, we'll take the next step together." As he left the room, Marissa sat there, the weight of his words still sinking in. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to embrace it. She was ready to step out of the shadows and into the light, no matter where it took her. And as she sat there, feeling the soft warmth of the sunlight on her face, she knew that this was just the beginning of something new. Something that she had never believed was possible, but now knew could be hers. As the days passed, Marissa began to feel the full weight of the change she was experiencing. The uncertainty that had once gripped her heart was slowly being replaced by a new sense of purpose. Each day, she woke up with a quiet determination that she hadn't known she was capable of. The house, once a place where she had merely existed, now felt like a place where she could build something of her own. It was a strange feeling, but one that grew stronger with each passing day. Vincent had given her more than just a place in his household. He had given her a chance at something more, something she hadn't even known she wanted until it was offered to her. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, she was ready to take the next step. One morning, Vincent called for her again. She was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the family, when she heard her name being called from the other side of the house. The sound of her name in his voice still made her heart race, but today, she didn't feel the same nerves she once had. Instead, there was an anticipation that she couldn't shake. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to his study, the familiar hallways now seeming like a pathway to something new. When she entered, Vincent was sitting at his desk, as usual, but today, there was something different in his demeanor. He wasn't just the Mafia boss. He seemed like the man she had come to know in these past few weeks, a man who was willing to give her a chance, to see her as something more. "Marissa," he said as she entered, his voice calm but filled with a quiet authority. "Come in. Sit." She nodded and took a seat across from him, her hands clasped in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable, as though they were both waiting for the right moment to speak. Vincent broke the stillness first. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "About taking the next step. About stepping into something more." Marissa's breath caught in her throat as she nodded. She had been thinking about it too, about what it meant to move forward, to leave behind the shadows of her old life. "I'm not sure what that looks like yet," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready to leave the life I've known." Vincent's eyes softened as he leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to leave everything behind all at once," he said gently. "But you have to start somewhere. You've already made the choice to step into a new life, even if you're not sure what that life looks like yet. The hardest part is simply deciding to take that first step." Marissa nodded slowly, his words settling in her mind. She had made a choice, whether she realized it or not. She had already taken that first step, simply by being here, by accepting that she could be more than just the maid. She had already begun to see herself differently, and that was enough. "I want to be ready," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to make something of this opportunity. I don't want to be invisible anymore." Vincent's gaze softened, and for a moment, Marissa saw something in his eyes, a quiet pride, perhaps, or maybe even a sense of relief. "I see that, Marissa," he said, his voice warm. "And I believe in you. You've already shown that you're capable of so much more than you think. You don't need to be anyone other than who you are. You just need to believe in yourself." His words hit her with an unexpected intensity. She had always doubted her worth, always thought of herself as nothing more than the tasks she performed. But Vincent had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. He had shown her that she could be more than the sum of her work. And now, she was starting to believe it too. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can do it all, but I want to try." Vincent smiled, and the warmth in his expression made Marissa's heart swell with something she couldn't name. "That's all I ask," he said softly. "We'll take this one step at a time. And no matter what, you're not alone in this." Marissa looked at him, her heart racing in her chest. For the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just the maid in the background anymore. She was someone who could choose her own path, someone who could build her own future. She wasn't sure what that future would look like, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to find out. As she left the study, Marissa walked down the hallway with a new sense of purpose. The house still felt the same, but she no longer saw it through the same eyes. She was ready to take that next step, to become something more, to claim the life that was waiting for her. And as she moved forward, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the strength and determination that Vincent had seen in her from the start. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone who mattered.